He hadn't cried in 23 years, not when they buried his father, not when he took his first life, not when the courts, the streets, and the devil himself tried to break him, but standing in a Chicago snowstorm pressing a photocopied flyer of his mother's face against a frozen brick wall. Knox Ashford's hands were shaking. 24 days. She had been gone 24 days, and every empire he had built couldn't bring her back. If this story already has your heart hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next, nobody saw it coming. The snow wasn't falling that night so much as it was attacking. It came sideways, sharp, and mean. The kind of Chicago winter that didn't care who you were or what you owned. It cut through wool coats, through pride, through everything a man thought made him untouchable. Knox Ashford had 3 cars circling the block. He had 2 men on either end of Wicker Avenue. He had a phone in his pocket with 17 contacts who would do anything he asked without a single question. He had power. He had money. He had fear working for him in every zip code on the north side. What he did not have was his mother. He pressed another flyer against the wall of a closed laundromat, smoothing it flat with his palm, even though the tape was barely holding in the wet cold. He stepped back and looked at her face. Ruth Ashford, 67 years old. Silver hair she always kept pinned back on Sundays. A small brown mole just beneath her left eye that she called her beauty mark, and that he had teased her about since he was 6 years old. Mama, that ain't a beauty mark. That's just a spot. Boy, everything on this face is beautiful. Don't you forget that. He hadn't forgotten a single thing about her. That was the problem. The remembering was what was tearing him apart. Boss. One of his men, a broad-shouldered man named Deacon, appeared at his elbow. We got the last 4 blocks covered. You want us to loop back around to Michigan Avenue? Knox didn't answer right away. He was still looking at her face. Knox. Deacon's voice dropped lower, careful. Nobody on his crew used his first name, but Deacon had been with him since they were teenagers on the same block. So Deacon got the privilege. Talk to me. She's 74 pounds, Deacon. His voice was flat, controlled, the way it always was in front of other men. She takes blood pressure medication twice a day. She can't be out in this. We'll find her. You said that 3 weeks ago. Deacon had no answer for that, because there wasn't one. Knox finally turned away from the flyer. His jaw was tight, his eyes darker than the sky above them. Go back to the car. I need 5 minutes. It's 12 degrees out here. 5 minutes. Deacon went. Knox stood alone on the sidewalk, the snow piling on his shoulders, and for one terrible moment, he let himself feel the full weight of it. 24 days. The police had already quietly downgraded the case. He'd seen it in the detective's eyes at their last meeting, the practiced sympathy, the careful language, the way the man kept saying, at this stage, like it meant something other than we've stopped looking. Knox had gripped the edge of that detective's desk hard enough to crack the wood and said very quietly, find her, or I will find the reason you didn't. The detective had found new urgency after that, but still, nothing. He started walking again, not toward his car, not toward anywhere in particular, just moving because standing still felt too much like giving up. He passed a pawn shop, a closed pharmacy, a corner store with bars on the windows, and then at the far end of the block, a thin strip of warm yellow light, a diner. The kind that still had handwritten specials taped to the window. The kind that had been there since before Knox was born and would probably outlast all of them. He pushed through the glass door mostly just to get out of the cold. The bell above the door rang twice. The place was half empty, a couple in a corner booth, an old man at the counter with a newspaper, 2 teenagers sharing a plate of fries near the back, the kind of quiet that felt earned, like everyone there had had a long day and just needed somewhere warm to land. Knox slid into a booth near the window, still in his coat, and set a small stack of flyers on the table without thinking. Habit. He'd been doing it everywhere. He flagged down the nearest waitress without looking up. Coffee. Black. Coming right up. The voice was warm, unhurried. He didn't register it. He was staring at his mother's face again on the top flyer, tracing the lines of it with his eyes the way he'd done 1,000 times in the past 3 weeks, and checking somehow, like if he looked long enough, something would change, like the paper might talk back. Where are you, Mama? The coffee arrived. He wrapped both hands around it. Outside, the snow came down harder. Bryn Holloway had been on her feet for 11 hours. She was working a double, her second this week, because her daughter's winter coat had given out, and the landlord had slid a rent notice under the door with a tone she didn't appreciate. And Bryn Holloway was the kind of woman who handled her problems herself. Always had, probably always would. She'd spotted the man in the corner the moment he walked in. Hard not to. He was the kind of person a room noticed, not because he was loud, but because of the opposite. He moved like the air got out of his way. Coat that cost more than her monthly rent, jaw like carved stone, eyes that had seen things she probably didn't want to imagine. But what caught her attention more than the man was what he put on the table. She refilled a coffee at the counter, grabbed a dessert menu she didn't need, and swung back toward his booth, just close enough to read the top flyer. Missing, Ruth Ashford, 67 years old. Bryn stopped walking. She stood very still in the middle of the diner floor and stared at that photograph. Silver hair, small mole beneath the left eye. Her beauty mark, she'd called it. First thing she'd said when she woke up that first morning, touching her own face like she was taking inventory. I still have my beauty mark. Good. I told the Lord not to take that. The coffee pot in Bryn's hand tilted slightly. She caught it before it spilled. Ruth, the woman she'd been calling Nan. The woman who had been sleeping in her daughter's bed for 19 days, wearing borrowed pajamas and eating scrambled eggs every morning and watching old game shows in the afternoons and humming hymns she couldn't name, but somehow still remembered all the words to. That's her, the photograph. It was her. It was absolutely, without any question, her. Bryn's heart hit the back of her ribs so hard she almost gasped out loud. She looked at the man sitting behind those flyers. The expensive coat, the hard eyes, the tension in every line of his body that said, I have not slept in weeks, even when nothing else about him would ever admit it. This is her son. The thought landed like a stone dropping into still water. He's been looking for her. He's been out here in the storm, putting up flyers, and she's been in my apartment 19 blocks away, eating my scrambled eggs and calling my daughter Little Bug. Bryn's mouth went dry. She turned around, walked back behind the counter, and set the coffee pot down before her hands could shake. She gripped the edge of the sink, breathed. Okay. She needed to tell him. Obviously, she needed to tell him. The woman Ruth, his mother, had been in her home for nearly 3 weeks. She was safe. She was warm. She was fine. This was good news. This was the best kind of news. So why were her palms sweating? She knew why. She'd looked at his face and done the math that any sensible woman with good instincts would do. The way his men had been circling the block. The way he'd walked in like he owned the floor before he even sat down. The flyers, dozens of them, all professionally printed, plastered across this neighborhood with the kind of manpower that didn't come from grief alone. Knox Ashford wasn't just a worried son. Bryn had lived in Chicago her whole life. She knew what he was. She grabbed her order pad, put it down, grabbed her phone, put it down, picked up the coffee pot again, then set it down again. You found his mother, you kept his mother, in your apartment for 19 days without calling the police, She didn't want to go to the police. Bryn remembered that conversation clearly. The second day when she'd first floated the idea of calling someone. Ruth had grabbed her wrist with both hands, surprising strength for someone so thin, and said, no police. Please, I don't know who I can trust. I just need to remember. Give me time to remember. And Bryn, who had her own complicated history with trusting institutions, had said okay. And now here they were. She smoothed her apron, straightened her shoulders, picked up a fresh mug and filled it. You're a grown woman, Bryn Holloway. You didn't do anything wrong. You took care of someone who needed it. Now you tell the truth and you let this family be whole again. She walked toward his booth. Sir. Knox looked up. The waitress was standing at his table with a coffee refill he hadn't asked for and an expression on her face that he couldn't quite read. Her eyes were steady, but there was something underneath them, something careful and watchful, and if he was reading it right, a little bit afraid. He didn't move, just looked at her. Your coffee's still. I don't need a refill, he said, not unkind, just flat. She didn't move. She set the coffee pot down on the edge of the table, which was strange and then she folded her hands together in front of her, which was stranger. He watched her eyes drop to the flyer on the table. Stay there, then come back up to his face. That woman, Bryn said. Her voice was quiet and controlled. She was keeping it very deliberate and controlled. The one on the flyer. Knox went completely still. Something in the atmosphere of the entire diner seemed to shift like a barometric pressure drop, like the 2 seconds before lightning. He had trained himself over decades not to react, not to let anything show before he understood exactly what he was dealing with. But something in his chest cracked open anyway. What about her, he said. It came out lower than he intended. Is she, Bryn paused, swallowed. Is she your mother? 1 second, 2 seconds. Where is she? It wasn't a question. His voice had changed completely. 3 words, iron flat, the kind of voice that made men twice her size rethink their choices. Bryn didn't flinch. He registered that. She didn't flinch. She's safe, Bryn said. She's been with me. Knox was out of the booth before she finished the sentence. He was standing close, too close, the full height and breadth of him, filling her vision, and both his hands were on her shoulders before either of them had processed what was happening. Not violent, not yet, but gripping, hard, the way a drowning man grips the side of a boat. Where? His voice cracked on the word, just slightly, just enough. Where is my mother? Right now, where is she? She's at my apartment. Bryn held his gaze. Her voice shook slightly, but she didn't look away. 19 blocks north. She's been there for 19 days. I found her outside in the cold. She was confused. She didn't know her name. She didn't know her name. She has memory problems. I know she has memory problems. His voice broke on the last word. Broke completely open, like something in him finally split at the seam after 24 days of holding every single thing together by force of will alone. His hands released her shoulders. He stepped back. He pressed one fist to his mouth. The whole diner had gone quiet. Bryn watched his face. She had expected anger. She had braced for fury, accusations, suspicion, the cold calculation she'd seen flash across his face the second she mentioned his mother. What she had not expected, what absolutely undid something inside her chest, was what she saw instead. He was trying not to cry. Knox Ashford, the man whose name made police precincts get quiet, and whose enemies had bad accidents, and whose territory stretched across half the north side, was standing in a diner, in his expensive coat with his fist pressed to his mouth, fighting with every ounce of whatever he had left, not to fall apart in front of a stranger. She's safe, Bryn said again, softer this time. I swear to you, she is completely safe. She's been sleeping in my daughter's room and eating real meals, and she has all her medication. Well, we had to figure out the medication situation that was. She stopped herself. She's okay, I didn't know who she was. She didn't know who she was, and I couldn't. You kept her. He looked at her. His eyes were wet. He wasn't hiding it anymore. A stranger, and you kept her. What else was I going to do, Bryn said, and she meant it. Leave her on the street. Something in Knox's expression shifted, moved through something complicated, disbelief, gratitude, grief, something she couldn't name. Take me to her, he said, right now. Take me to my mother. Bryn grabbed her coat from the hook behind the counter, told the other waitress she had an emergency, didn't stop to explain. There was nothing to explain that wouldn't take an hour she didn't have. Knox was already at the door. His men had materialized from somewhere she hadn't seen where, and now there were 2 large men flanking him with expressions like closed fists, looking at her the way bodyguards look at people who have just announced they know where the boss's most important person is. She felt that look all the way down her spine, but she squared her shoulders, pushed through the door into the cold and said, It's 19 blocks. I'll take you. We'll drive, Knox said. It's faster to walk, one-way streets. She glanced at him. Unless your men can fly. The smaller of the 2 bodyguards actually looked like he might smile at that. He covered it immediately. Knox studied her for one moment, then nodded once. Then we walk. And so they walked the Mafia boss and the waitress through the snow, 19 blocks north, with 2 large men trailing 10 steps behind them toward an apartment where an old woman was watching a game show and humming a hymn she couldn't quite remember the name of. And the whole way Knox Ashford said nothing. because he was using every molecule of his control to hold himself together for 19 more blocks. And Bryn Holloway said nothing either, because she was beginning to understand that what she had thought was a simple act of human decency, taking in a cold, lost, frightened old woman, had in fact dropped her directly into the center of something she hadn't begun to understand yet. But they walked, and with every block, Knox's breathing steadied and his jaw set harder and his eyes got very, very still. The kind of still that has nothing to do with calm and everything to do with a man who is preparing himself for the possibility that when he walks through that door, the woman on the other side of it may look him in the face and not know who he is. 24 days. She'd been gone 24 days. And the last time anyone had seen her, she had been leaving the small house he'd bought for her on Elm Street in the middle of the afternoon in her good coat, the one she saved for church, and she had not come back. Why the good coat, Mama? Where were you going? That question had lived in his chest for 3.5 weeks, like a splinter that kept going deeper. He needed the answer. He needed his mother. He needed to walk through that door. 12 steps behind them, Deacon exchanged a look with the other guard. Neither of them had ever seen Knox Ashford walk 19 blocks in the snow for anything in his life. Neither of them said a word. They just walked. The apartment building was narrow and old, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a barber shop with a light on in the back. Bryn led him to the 3rd floor without speaking, her key already out before they reached the landing. She stopped at the door, looked at him. Knox had his hand on the wall beside the door frame, not leaning, just touching it, like he needed to feel something solid. She calls herself Nan, Bryn said quietly. She didn't remember her name for the first few days. My daughter started calling her Nan, and it stuck. I need you to know that before you go in. His jaw flexed once. What else? Bryn chose her words carefully. She has good days and harder days. Today was a pretty good day, but good doesn't mean she might not. She stopped, tried again. Just go slowly. Okay, whatever you're feeling, just go slowly. Knox looked at the door. Then he looked at her. And for the first time since she'd called his name in that diner, which she hadn't done, she'd called nobody's name. She just said, sir, and somehow that one small word had split his entire world open. She saw something in his face that wasn't power or grief or carefully constructed control. It was just fear, plain and human and devastating. She won't know me, will she? He said. It wasn't really a question. Bryn didn't answer because the answer was probably not tonight, and she didn't know how to say that without breaking something that was already barely holding. So instead, she put her key in the lock and opened the door, and from the living room came the small, steady sound of a television, and then a voice thin and sweet and tired saying, "Little bug, is that you? Come tell Nan what they said on the show tonight." Knox Ashford made a sound he would never let any living person hear him make again. It came from somewhere below language, from the place where a 6-year-old boy still lived inside the grown man, the boy who used to fall asleep in that very voice's warmth, the boy who built his whole world around it before the world got hard and he got harder, and the distance between them grew into something he'd told himself he was fine with. He wasn't fine with it. He had never been fine with it. He stepped through the door, and somewhere across the city, in a warm office with the blinds drawn, a phone vibrated once on a mahogany desk. The man behind the desk looked at the notification, a small alert from a tracking application he shouldn't have had access to, and that nobody knew he was running, and he saw it immediately. Knox's location, stationary, 3rd floor of a building on the north side. He read the address twice, set the phone down, leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in 24 days, Trent Mallory allowed himself a slow, careful smile. Knox stepped through that door, and the first thing he saw was the back of his mother's head. She was sitting in a worn armchair facing the television, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, the way she only ever wore it at home, the way she never let anyone outside the family see it. His chest seized, his feet stopped working. He stood in the doorway of a stranger's apartment and looked at the back of his mother's head, and for a full 4 seconds, he forgot entirely that he was Knox Ashford, forgot the men downstairs, forgot the cold, forgot 24 days of rage and searching and barely sleeping. He was just her son, standing very still, terrified to say her name wrong. Bryn touched his arm lightly. "Just go slow," she murmured. He nodded once. He moved. He walked around the side of the armchair slowly, like he was approaching something sacred. And when Ruth Ashford came into full view, sitting there in a faded blue cardigan that wasn't hers, a blanket across her knees, reading, glasses pushed up on her head, the same way she'd done his whole life, his throat closed completely. She looked thinner. She looked tired. But she looked alive and warm and real, and he had to stop walking for a second because his legs weren't entirely cooperating. Ruth looked up from the television. She looked at him. Her eyes moved across his face with the pleasant, mild curiosity of someone meeting a stranger for the first time. Nothing clicked. No flash of recognition. No sharp intake of breath. No Knox baby, where have you been? Nothing that a son waits his whole life to see in his mother's eyes when she looks at him. Just nothing. Hello, she said politely. Are you one of Bryn's friends? The word friends hit him somewhere behind the sternum. He got down on one knee in front of her chair. Slowly, carefully, eye level. The way she'd always made him do when she wanted to look him in the face and know he was telling the truth. Mama, he said. His voice was wrecked. He didn't try to hide it. It's me. It's Knox. Ruth looked at him kindly, patiently, the way you look at someone who said something you don't quite understand but you don't want to be rude about. I don't know a Knox, she said gently. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I don't think I know you. Behind him, he heard Bryn draw a slow breath. His jaw worked. He pressed his lips together. Hard. He had known this was coming. Bryn had warned him, and some part of him had already accepted the math of it, but knowing something intellectually and having your mother look at your face and tell you she doesn't know you are two entirely different categories of pain. You do know me, he said. He kept his voice even. Soft. Softer than he'd spoken to anyone in years. You know me, I know you don't remember right now, but you know me. I'm your boy. You used to call me your heartbeat. Something moved across Ruth's face. A ripple, like a stone dropped into deep water. Then it was gone. That's a nice thing to say, she said. She reached out and patted his hand. Her hand was warm, small. He remembered those hands. He remembered them packing his lunch in a brown paper bag with his name written on the front in blue marker. He remembered them on his forehead when he had a fever. He remembered them folded in her lap in the third pew on Sunday mornings. He turned his hand over and held hers. She didn't pull away. Where's Bryn? Ruth said, craning her neck slightly. Bryn, come in here. This young man is being very sweet. Bryn stepped forward. I'm here, Nan. Her voice was careful and warm at the same time. This man, he came to see you. He's been looking for you for a long time. Ruth looked back at Knox. She studied his face for a moment, with real attention, the way a person does when they're reaching for something just out of reach. You look sad, she said finally. I am, Knox said. I've been very sad. Why? He had to breathe through the answer. Because I missed you. Ruth patted his hand again. Well, you found me now, she said simply. So don't be sad anymore. And Knox Ashford, who had not cried in front of another human being since he was 9 years old, put his free hand over his face and bent forward and shook with something that wasn't quite crying but was everything crying is made of. Ruth kept her hand in his. She didn't seem frightened by it. She made a small sound, not a word, just a sound the kind mothers make when something hurts and words aren't enough, and she put her other hand on top of his bowed head. From the doorway, Bryn watched and said nothing. Her throat was too tight for words. Then Ruth's bedroom door opened, and a small voice said, Mama, who's the man? Bryn spun around. Hey, baby, I told you to stay. I heard voices. The little girl, 7 years old, wide-eyed, wearing pajamas with small yellow stars on them, was looking at Knox with the frank, unfiltered curiosity that only children and very old people still permit themselves. Is he crying? Cora. Bryn moved fast, crouching down to her daughter's level. Baby, go back to your room for a few minutes, okay? Mama needs to... Nan, is that man okay? Cora directed the question past Bryn entirely straight to Ruth. Ruth looked up from Knox's bowed head and smiled at the little girl. He's going to be fine, little bug. He just missed somebody very much. Cora thought about this seriously. Then she crossed the room, completely ignoring every adult in the space, and stood next to Knox's kneeling figure and put her small hand on his shoulder. I cried when I missed my fish, she said helpfully. His name was Captain. He died. It's okay to cry about missing. Knox lifted his head. He looked at this child with her hand on his shoulder, and her serious 7-year-old eyes and her yellow star pajamas, and something in his expression cracked all the way through to something almost like warmth. Captain, he repeated. He was a betta fish. Blue. Very beautiful. We flushed him. Cora, Bryn said weakly. What? Knox actually laughed. It was short and rough and surprised like it had come out against his will. But it was real. He looked at Cora for one more second, then he looked at Bryn, and in that look she saw the particular gratitude of a person who has just been pulled back from a very dark edge by the most unexpected possible thing. Thank you, he said quietly. She wasn't sure if he was talking to Cora or to her. She decided it didn't matter. Cora bedroom. Now. Bryn said it firmly enough this time that it worked. Cora went glancing back twice. Knox stood up slowly. He looked at his mother who had settled back in her chair and returned her attention mildly to the television, as though the last 5 minutes had been perfectly normal. The sight of that, the ease of it, the blankness twisted something in his gut. He turned to Bryn. How long has she been like this? Bryn moved toward the kitchen, keeping her voice low. He followed. Since I found her. I don't know how long before that. She couldn't tell me. Where did you find her? Outside my building, she was sitting on the bottom step in her coat in the cold. It was after midnight. Bryn paused. She wasn't scared. That was the thing that got me. She wasn't scared at all. She just looked lost, like she knew something was wrong but couldn't locate what. She was wearing her good coat. Bryn looked at him. Yeah, it's in the closet. I can get it back to you. She wears that coat when she's going somewhere important. Knox pressed his hands flat on the counter. She was going somewhere that night. She had a reason for being out. Someone asked her somewhere. He stopped. His eyes sharpened. Did she say anything? Anything at all about where she'd been or who she'd been with? At first, almost nothing. Just fragments. She kept saying a name I couldn't make it out clearly. Something that started with a T. Bryn frowned, trying to remember. Toby, maybe? Or Tony? She'd say it and then she'd lose it again. Knox went very still. Say that again. It started with a T. She'd get this look on her face, almost scared just for a second, and then she'd say this name and then it would be gone, and she'd be back to normal, watching TV, asking about Cora. Trent, Knox said, flat and cold and terrifyingly quiet. Maybe. I couldn't be sure. Was it Trent? Bryn looked at him. At the way his entire body had changed in the span of 3 seconds, the stillness that wasn't calm, the jaw that had gone rigid, the eyes that had gone somewhere she didn't want to follow. I think it could have been, why, who is Trent? Knox said nothing for a moment. He was looking at something she couldn't see, some internal picture assembling itself piece by terrible piece. Nobody, he said finally. And she knew immediately the way anyone with working instincts knows that it was the most significant nobody she'd ever heard anyone mention. She let it go, for now. She needs her real medication, Bryn said instead, pivoting to safer ground. I got what I could. A neighbor of mine has a daughter who's a pharmacist. She helped me figure out the blood pressure situation. But it's not the prescription she should have. I'll have her doctor here by morning. She should also see a neurologist. The memory, I know. His voice was clipped. Not unkind, but carrying the particular sharpness of a person who cannot afford to feel too much about one thing at a time. I'll handle it. I'll handle everything. I just need to know she's... He stopped, turned to look through the kitchen doorway at his mother in her chair. Ruth was humming now, quietly to herself the way she always did when she was content. She had forgotten entirely that he was in the room. Is she happy? He asked. The question was barely above a whisper. When she's here, is she okay? Bryn followed his gaze. She watched Ruth hum and fold the corner of her blanket over and over with absent fingers. She's not scared, Bryn said. She wakes up confused sometimes, but it passes fast. She likes routine. Scrambled eggs in the morning, game shows in the afternoon. She and Cora have this whole thing with the deck of cards. She stopped herself, realized she was smiling. She calls Cora Little Bug. Cora decided that's the best nickname anyone's ever had. Knox watched his mother. She called me that, he said, when I was small. I know, she mentioned a boy once. She said, I had a boy who was my whole heart. She couldn't remember his name. Bryn paused, but she remembered what he felt like. Knox's hand closed into a fist on the counter. One long beat of silence. Then his phone went off. He looked at the screen. His expression shuddered instantly. Every human thing in his face sealed behind something that had no name, but that Bryn recognized on some cellular level as dangerous. I have to take this. He stepped out onto the small balcony, pulling the glass door mostly shut behind him. Through it, Bryn could hear nothing but the low register of his voice controlled again, the warmth of the last 20 minutes stripped completely away. She turned back to the kitchen and picked up the coffee pot because she needed something to do with her hands. She poured a cup, drank it without tasting it, looked at Ruth. Something had been sitting in her chest since he'd gone still at the name Trent, and she couldn't put it down. She'd had this woman in her home for 19 days. She knew the sound of her breathing in the morning. She knew the way she took her tea, no sugar, little splash of milk, and the hymns she hummed without knowing she knew them, and the way she reached for Cora's hand when she walked gentle and automatic, like holding a child's hand was a thing her body remembered even when her mind didn't. She knew her. And now this man, this enormous, frightening, complicated man was on her balcony, taking a call, and his mother was in her living room and Bryn was standing in her kitchen there thinking, what exactly have I walked into? The balcony door opened. Knox came back in. His face was different now, harder, flat in a way that felt deliberate. I need to arrange to move her, he said. Bryn blinked. Move her tonight. Tomorrow morning, early. He set his phone on the counter. I'll have a car here at 7. I'll need to have her seen by 10. She's not going to understand why she's leaving, Bryn said. The words came out before she'd decided to say them. She knows this apartment. She knows Cora. She has a routine here. If you take her somewhere new with people she doesn't recognize. She doesn't recognize me, Knox said. His voice didn't change. She's going home. Her home isn't going to bueno like home to her right now. It's going to feel like a strange place with no Cora and no scrambled eggs and no card games. She is my mother. He said it carefully, not loud, but with a weight that stopped the air in the room. She is my mother, and she has been missing for 24 days, and she is coming home with me. I know that. Bryn held his gaze. I'm not arguing that. I'm telling you that whoever helps her transition needs to know how she works right now. She needs familiarity. She needs patience. She needs someone who doesn't, she stopped. Doesn't what? Doesn't look at her like you do right now. The silence between them went very still. How do I look at her, he asked. Bryn took a breath. Like if you love her hard enough, she'll remember. She said it as gently as she could. That's not how this works. If she sees that in your face that need, it'll make her anxious. She can feel things even when she can't name them. She'll know she's failing you, and she won't know why. Something moved through his expression. Painful and slow and completely unguarded, he looked away, out toward his mother, then back at the counter. I know how to hold a face, he said quietly. I know you do, Bryn said. I watched you do it all the way from the diner. But she's your mother, it's different. He didn't answer. She didn't push. From the living room, Ruth's humming stopped. Both of them looked up. Ruth had turned in her chair. She was looking toward the kitchen, not at Bryn, at Knox, looking at him the way she'd looked before when she'd said he seemed sad. But this time the look on her face was different. This time she was frowning slightly, reaching. Knox went very still. Ruth got up from the chair, slowly, carefully, the way she always did when her knees ached, which Bryn had learned meant it was going to rain tomorrow. She crossed the room in her slippers without being asked, without being called, pulled by something she couldn't name. She walked up to Knox. She looked at him for a long time. He did not breathe. And then Ruth Ashford lifted her hand and pressed her palm gently to the left side of his jaw, to the scar there, the thin raised line that ran from the edge of his cheekbone down to his chin. An old scar, decades old, the kind a 9-year-old boy gets when he falls off a bicycle on broken pavement trying to impress the neighborhood kids. And his mother spends 3 hours at the kitchen table holding his face and telling him, he's going to be fine, baby. He's going to be just fine. Ruth's fingers rested on that scar. Her eyes went somewhere very far away and very close at the same time. I know this, she whispered. Knox stopped breathing entirely. I know this, Ruth said again. Her voice was confused and wondering and reaching towards something that wasn't quite there yet, but was closer than it had been in 24 days. I know this, Mark. I know, she faltered, her brow furrowed. I know this. Mama, His voice broke completely. He covered her hand with both of his. I'm here. I'm right here. Ruth looked at him. Something behind her eyes, not memory, not yet, but the ghost of it, the shape that memory leaves when it retreats, moved across her face. My boy, she said, uncertain, slow, like reading a word she'd almost forgotten. My boy had a scar, he finished, on his face from a bicycle. Ruth's eyes filled. You fell, she said. You wouldn't stop crying, and I told you big boys don't cry, and then I held you for an hour because I didn't mean it. Knox bent forward. He pressed his forehead to hers, both his hands still holding hers against his face. His shoulders shook once, just once. You always meant the opposite of what you said, he said, his voice barely there. I always knew. Ruth made a sound, small and broken and recognizing. And for 60 seconds in the living room of a waitress's apartment in the middle of a Chicago snowstorm, the most feared man on the north side held his mother's hands against his face and was just a boy who had missed her. Bryn pressed herself back against the kitchen counter and looked at the ceiling and willed herself to hold it together. She didn't entirely succeed. Then her phone buzzed on the counter beside her. She picked it up without thinking, expecting her coworker from the diner, expecting her landlord, expecting anything ordinary. It was an unknown number. A text. 4 words. Get out of there. She stared at it. Her fingers went cold. She looked up at Knox, still holding his mother's hands still in the only moment of peace he'd had in 24 days. She looked back at the text. Get out of there. She typed back fast. Who is this? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again, and then someone who knows what happens next. He's being watched. She was taken for a reason, and whoever had her taken knows exactly where she is now. Bryn read it twice. Her heart was slamming. She looked at Knox. She looked at the window. She looked at the door. Knox, she said. Her voice came out flat and strange even to her own ears. He straightened up slowly, read something in her face immediately. He was already moving when she held up the phone. He read the message. Once. The warmth that had been in his face 1 minute ago was gone so completely it was like it had never existed. His eyes went to the window, then the door. Deacon, he said, not loud, controlled, like a switch flipping. His man was through the apartment door in under 15 seconds. And somewhere across the city, in a warm office with the blinds still drawn, Trent Mallory looked at the notification on his screen that told him Knox's phone had just gone active, and he picked up a different phone, a burner untraceable, and made a call. And whoever answered on the other end listened and said simply, on our way. Deacon came through the door with his hand already under his jacket, and the shift in the room was immediate and total, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in 2 seconds. He read Knox's face the way he'd been reading it for 20 years, and what he saw there made him scan the windows before he even asked a question. Talk to me, Deacon said. Knox handed him the phone with Bryn's screen still showing. Deacon read it, his jaw locked. How long ago? Just now, Bryn said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. She had them pressed flat against the counter to keep them that way. I don't know the number. It came out of nowhere. Deacon was already on his own phone, moving toward the window, keeping his body angled away from the glass. Marcus, lock it down. 3rd floor. Yeah, right now, all 3 points. He lowered the phone and looked at Knox. We need to move. I know. Not in 5 minutes. Now. I know, Deacon. Ruth was still standing in the middle of the living room, looking between the men, with the mild, patient confusion of someone watching a television program in a language they don't quite speak. She wasn't frightened. That was almost worse, that she didn't understand enough of what was happening to be frightened. Bryn moved past Knox and went straight to her. Nan. She kept her voice low and easy the way she'd learned to in the past 3 weeks, no sharp edges, no urgency. Nothing that would snag on Ruth's anxiety and pull. We're going to take a little trip, okay, you and me and Cora, nothing to worry about. Ruth looked at her carefully. Is it raining? Something like that. I need you to get your shoes, sweetheart. Can you do that for me? My good shoes or my walking shoes? Walking shoes. Fast ones. Ruth nodded like this was a perfectly reasonable conversation and moved toward the bedroom without another word. Bryn straightened up and found Knox directly behind her. You don't have to come, he said quietly. Not unkind. Urgent. I can take her from here. You and your daughter don't need to be any part of what... That text came to my phone, Bryn said. She looked at him hard. Whoever sent it knows my number, which means they know who I am, which means staying here is not safer than going with you. Knox held her gaze. 2 seconds. 3. Fair enough, he said. Also, Bryn added, already heading for Cora's room, your mother is going to panic if I'm not there, you know that. She didn't wait for him to answer because she already knew she was right, and there wasn't time for him to admit it gracefully. Cora was awake. She'd never really gone back to sleep, sitting up in bed with her arms around her knees and her eyes very large. Mama, what's happening? We're going on an adventure. Bryn pulled her daughter's coat off the hook. Put this on. Shoes. Fast. Is Nan coming? Yes. Is that man coming? Yes. Cora processed this with the economy of a child who has learned that certain tones in her mother's voice are not for negotiating with. She put on her coat. She put on her shoes. She grabbed, without being told, the small stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2 years old. Bryn watched her do it and felt something in her chest tighten almost past bearing. This is not her life. This is not what I built for her. Then she picked up her daughter's hand and walked back out. Deacon had 2 men she'd never seen before inside the apartment. Now they'd come from somewhere downstairs she didn't ask, and Knox was at the window, not looking through it, just listening. His whole posture was different now. Not the grief-wrecked son who'd knelt in front of his mother's chair. Something older and colder had taken over the outside of him, the version he wore when the world required it. Ruth came back from the bedroom in her walking shoes and stopped when she saw the new men. Knox, she said. Everyone in the room went still. Knox turned from the window. Ruth was looking at him, not with the mild, pleasant confusion of before, with something that had more shape to it, something that knew his face even if it couldn't fully hold his name. Knox, she said again, quieter, testing the word. Is that your name? He crossed to her in 4 steps. He took her hands. He kept his face perfectly calm, perfectly warm, perfectly. Nothing is wrong. Bryn watched him do it and understood what he'd meant when he said, I know how to hold a face. He was extraordinary at it. That's my name, Mama, he said. You got it right. Ruth looked down at their joined hands. I keep losing things, she said softly. In my head, I reach for them and they slide away. She looked up at him. It scares me sometimes when I'm alone and quiet. You're not alone anymore, he said. I've got you now. Okay, I've got you. She studied him for one more moment. Then she nodded, small and trusting, and said, okay, baby. And Knox breathed. Just once. Very carefully. Then he looked at Deacon and gave the smallest nod, and everyone in the apartment started moving. They went out the back. Deacon had thought of that, apparently, when he'd been down the stairs and through the building fast enough to identify that the back exit opened onto an alley that ran parallel to the main street, away from wherever Marcus had spotted the vehicle that shouldn't have been there. Bryn didn't ask how Marcus had spotted it. She didn't ask what kind of vehicle. She held Cora's hand and kept pace with the woman she'd been calling Nan for 19 days and did not look back. The cold hit them hard when the back door opened. Ruth made a small sound. Cora pressed closer to Bryn's side. Knox was immediately at his mother's other side, not touching, not crowding, just there, a wall between her and everything else. There's a car 30 seconds from here, Deacon said, low and close. Black SUV. Marcus has it. Keep moving. They moved. Bryn had lived in this city her whole life, and she had never in 31 years walked down a back alley in the middle of the night with a mafia boss and 2 armed men and an old woman with no memory and her 7-year-old daughter, and yet here she was, and the strangest part, the part she would think about later, much later, when she had the space to think, was that she felt safer than she had in years, which made no logical sense whatsoever, and she chose not to examine it. The SUV was there. Marcus had it running. They loaded in fast. Cora first, then Ruth, then Bryn, then Knox. Deacon took the front. The other men split off without instruction. The doors closed. The car moved. Ruth immediately looked at Cora. You brought your rabbit, she said approvingly. His name is Gerald, Cora said. That's a very serious name for a rabbit. He's a very serious rabbit. And just like that, in the back of a moving SUV, fleeing God knows what, the 2 of them settled into the specific peaceful world they had built together over 3 weeks, and Bryn pressed her forehead briefly against the cold window and closed her eyes and breathed. Knox was watching his mother and Cora. She could feel it without looking. Thank you, he said, quietly, directed at the window or maybe at nothing, for taking care of her. I told you, Bryn said, eyes still closed. What else was I going to do? Most people would have done something else, he paused. Most people would have called the police or a hospital or nobody at all and just walked the other direction. I'm not most people. No, he said, you're not. Silence for a moment, the city sliding past outside, Ruth murmuring something to Cora about Gerald's ears. Where are we going? Bryn asked. Somewhere safe. That's a wonderful answer that tells me nothing. She caught the brief shape of something almost like a smile cross his face in the dark. A property on the west side. Nobody connects it to me directly. It's clean. Does it have scrambled eggs? It has a full kitchen. Then we're fine. He looked at her. She looked back. And in the back of that moving car, in the specific middle of the night way that extraordinary circumstances create extraordinary honesty, something shifted between them. Not large, not dramatic, just a small, quiet recognition. I see you. You're real. We're in this. Bryn looked away first, back out the window. That was when her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. She looked at it under the screen's glow, angling it away from Cora. You got her out. Good. Listen carefully. The man who took her is closer to Knox than you understand. He will be at whatever location Knox moves her to within 3 hours. He has someone inside. Bryn read it 3 times. Then she turned the phone to Knox. She watched his face as he read it. Watched the absolute control he kept over it, which was, she had decided, more frightening than any emotional reaction would have been. Controlled rage is architecture. It has load-bearing walls. It was built to last. He gave the phone back. He looked at Deacon. Change the location, he said. Deacon turned from the front seat. The West Side property. Not anymore. Call Reyes, his place in Bridgeport, and don't use the encrypted channel. Deacon stared at him. The encrypted channel is compromised. Use the open line. Deacon stared another beat, then turned forward. Calling Reyes. Bryn leaned slightly closer to Knox. You think someone is monitoring your communications? I think someone has been inside my operation for long enough to know how I move. His voice was barely above the road noise. Not calm controlled, which was different. And if they're inside my communications, then the low shun I named in the encrypted channel is already blown. So you named a fake one on the open line, Bryn said, and whoever is listening reports back that you're going to Bridgeport, and goes to Bridgeport, and you actually go somewhere else entirely. Bryn absorbed this. You've done this before, more times than I should have had to. He looked out his window. The difference is that before I knew where the leak was, or I thought I did. Something hardened in his profile. I was wrong. Trent, Bryn said. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She thought of the name Ruth had kept reaching for in her confused moments. The T name, the one that came with that flash of fear behind Ruth's eyes before it slid away again. She hadn't made the full connection until now, not to the scale of it, not to what it meant that the person who might have orchestrated this was someone Knox trusted. How long has he worked for you? She asked. 8 years, he said it flat, like a door closing. Since before I was... He stopped, glanced at Cora, who was occupied with Ruth and Gerald. Since early on. Could he have been working against you that whole time? No. He said it with absolute certainty, then less certainty. I don't know what I know right now. That honesty cost him something. She could see it. A man like Knox Ashford admitting he didn't know something was not a small thing. The men who took her, Bryn said carefully. Do you know why? What did they want? Knox was quiet for a long moment. Ruth laughed softly at something Cora said. Outside the city kept going. My mother knows things, he said. She's lived my life with me. Not the details, I kept her away from the details. But she knows people. She knows names. She knows the shape of things. He paused. There's a federal case being built. Has been for 2 years. Someone is cooperating with the government. I've been trying to find out who. He stopped again. My mother overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to, about 3 months ago, at my house when she was visiting. She didn't understand what she heard, but she heard a name she recognized. Trent's name, Bryn said. She must have said something to him. In her way, casual, not understanding the weight of it. Just, oh, I heard someone mention you, something that small. Something that told him she'd been nearby when she shouldn't have been. The full shape of it landed on Bryn like a physical weight. He had her taken, she said, not to get to you, to get to her, to find out what she'd heard, to make sure she couldn't repeat it to the right people. Knox's voice was absolutely level in a way that made the air in the car feel different. She couldn't tell them anything useful. Her memory was already fragile. She slipped away from them somehow, or they left her somewhere thinking she couldn't find her way back. He looked at Bryn directly. And she found you. Bryn thought about Ruth on the front steps, in her good coat, midnight, not scared. Not scared because she didn't fully understand what had happened to her, because it had already slid away into the fog. She's lucky, Bryn said. No, Knox said. She found you, that's not luck. That's something else, Dom. The car slowed, changed direction. Deacon had routed them somewhere new, not Bridgeport, obviously. Knox didn't announce the real destination out loud, and Bryn didn't ask. Cora had fallen asleep against Ruth's shoulder. Ruth had her arm around the little girl with the practiced ease of someone who had held sleeping children for decades and knew exactly how to hold the weight of them. She was looking out the window at the city going past her, expression soft and distant and almost peaceful. And then Ruth said, without turning from the window clearly and without any confusion at all, Trent came to the house in November. Every adult in the car went still. He brought flowers? Ruth continued in the mild conversational tone of someone recounting an ordinary memory. Yellow ones. He knows I like yellow. He sat with me at the kitchen table and we had tea. She paused. He asked me what I'd heard. Bryn didn't breathe. Knox turned completely to face his mother. Mama. Very careful, very soft. What did you tell him? Ruth was quiet for a moment. Cora slept on against her arm. I told him I didn't hear anything important. She paused again, her brow furrowed just slightly. But I lied. The word dropped into the silence of the car like a stone. You lied, Knox repeated. I didn't trust the way he asked, Ruth said simply. A man who needs to know what an old woman heard isn't asking for a good reason. She looked at Knox then, fully, clearly, with more presence in her eyes than she'd shown since he'd walked through Bryn's door. I remembered what you always said. When someone asks what you know, first figure out why they want to know it. Knox stared at his mother. So I told him nothing, Ruth said, and then I went home, and then the clarity flickered, like a light in a windstorm. And then I don't remember what happened after that. That's okay, Knox said. His voice was rough at the edges. Mama, that's okay. You did everything right. The name, Bryn said softly, leaning forward. She hated pushing, but she had to. Ruth, the name you heard. The one Trent didn't know you heard. Do you remember it? Ruth looked at her, that gentle, reaching expression, working towards something. It was a woman's name, she said. A woman who works for, she faltered. Her hand moved to her temple. It slides away when I reach for it. That's okay, Bryn said. Don't chase it. Just let it. Patterson, Ruth said. Dead silence. Deacon from the front seat turned his head. Knox had gone the color of chalk. Say that again, he said. Patterson, Ruth repeated. Trent said it on the phone before he saw me standing there. He said Patterson is ready to testify. And then he saw me, and he put the phone down, and I pretended I'd been there the whole time talking about nothing. She looked at Knox. Was that the right thing to do? Knox took both his mother's hands in his. That was exactly the right thing to do, he said. Patterson, U.S. Attorney Claire Patterson, the woman who had been quietly building a federal RICO case against Knox's organization for 22 months. The woman Knox's lawyers had been assured had no cooperating witnesses with any real proximity to the operation. Trent had been feeding her. 8 years of trust, of loyalty, performed and rewarded, of seats at every table and access to every room, and Trent Mallory had been feeding a federal prosecutor for God knows how long. And then when Knox's own mother accidentally heard one sentence, Trent had decided the safest option was to make her disappear. Not kill her. Even he hadn't gone that far. But make her disappear. Discredit her. Let the memory loss do the work. Hope she wandered long enough that nobody found her, or that if someone did, she couldn't remember enough to matter. He hadn't counted on Bryn. He hadn't counted on Cora calling her Nan and yellow scrambled eggs and a deck of cards and 19 days of routine and care that gave Ruth's mind enough stillness to hold on to things. Knox sat with all of that in his chest for 30 seconds without moving. Then he looked at Deacon, and Deacon, who had known Knox Ashford for 23 years and had never once seen him look the way he looked right now, picked up his phone without a word and started making calls. Bryn watched Knox from across the seat. Ruth had returned her attention to the sleeping child against her shoulder. The moment of clarity had been real, but its edges were already softening the way they always did. She could see it, the gentle retreat behind Ruth's eyes as the present grew comfortable again, and the sharp memories receded. But the name was out. Patterson. It was out, and Knox had it, and somewhere on the other side of the city, Trent Mallory was still sitting in his warm office thinking he had 3 more hours before anyone came close to the truth. He had about 3 minutes before Knox's people started moving. Bryn looked at Knox. "What happens now?" she asked. Knox looked at his mother, silver hair, borrowed cardigan sleeping child in her arms, the whole impossible, sacred, ordinary picture of her, and when he looked back at Bryn, his face was the face of a man who has just decided exactly how the rest of the night is going to go. "Now," he said quietly, "someone answers for what they did to her." The safe house was a townhouse on the south side that belonged, on paper, to a retired schoolteacher named Gloria Reyes, who had never existed. Knox had 3 properties like it scattered across the city, places that appeared in no filing connected to his name, purchased through layers of shell companies so clean they would bore an auditor to sleep. He had built his life around redundancy, around always having a door that nobody knew existed until he needed to walk through it. He had never needed one this badly. They pulled into the attached garage at 2:17 in the morning. Marcus killed the engine. Nobody moved for a moment, the particular stillness of people who have been holding themselves tense for an hour and aren't sure yet that they can let go. Ruth had fallen asleep against the window somewhere on the south side, her head tipped at the angle that Knox recognized from every long car ride of his childhood, and he had spent the last 20 minutes not looking away from her face, just watching her breathe, the simple staggering fact of her breathing. "We're here, Nan," Bryn said gently, her hand on Ruth's arm. Ruth came awake the way she always did, not startled, just surfacing like she'd only ever been resting just beneath the surface of things. "Are we at church?" she asked. "Not tonight," Bryn said, "but there's a bed, a warm one." "That'll do," Ruth said, and accepted Bryn's hand as she climbed out of the car. Cora was fully asleep, limp and heavy, the way only children can be. Knox lifted her before Bryn could smoothly, without asking, without making it a moment, and Bryn watched this man who had spent 8 years trusting the wrong person carry her 7-year-old daughter through a doorway like it was the most natural thing in the world, and she decided not to think too carefully about what that did to the space behind her ribs. Inside, Knox set Cora on the sofa and straightened up. The warmth he'd just shown disappeared the second he turned around. He pulled Deacon aside and they talked low and fast in the hallway, not a conversation Bryn was meant to hear, and she didn't try. She settled Ruth in the bedroom at the end of the hall, waited until the old woman's breathing evened out, then came back to the living room and sat across from her sleeping daughter and let herself be afraid for exactly 60 seconds. She counted them. She had learned a long time ago that giving fear a container made it manageable. 60 seconds, then done. At 60, she stood up. She went to find Knox. He was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with his phone face down and both hands pressed flat on either side of it, staring at nothing. He looked for the first time since she'd seen him in the diner like someone who was tired. Not weak, just tired, the kind that gets into the bones. "Is she settled?" he asked without turning around. "Asleep before I left the room." Bryn leaned against the doorframe. Deacon making arrangements. For Trent, he didn't answer right away. He turned the phone over once face up, then back down. "For the situation." "You can say his name," Bryn said. "It's not going to break anything that isn't already broken." Knox looked at her over his shoulder. The kitchen light made his face harder than it probably was. "You ask a lot of direct questions for someone who just met me 6 hours ago. You let a stranger carry your mother across the city in the middle of the night," Bryn said. "I think we're past the point of performing polite." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, something quieter. He turned around and leaned back against the counter with his arms crossed. Looking at her with that full, assessing attention, He had the kind that made you feel like he was reading the table of contents of everything you'd ever been. Patterson is the U.S. attorney building a RICO case against my organization, he said. I think you understood that in the car. I put most of it together. Trent has been cooperating with her office. I don't know for how long. I don't know how much he's given them. He paused. I do know that my mother overheard enough to make him feel exposed. And I know what he decided to do about that. He didn't have her killed, Bryn said. No. Why not? Knox was quiet for a moment. Because she's Ruth Ashford, he said. Even Trent knew what that would mean. He looked at his hands. Or maybe he still had enough of a conscience to stop short of that particular line. I genuinely cannot tell you anymore which it was. He said the last sentence with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been trying to reconcile two versions of the same person and cannot make them fit. 8 years, Bryn said. 8 years. Did you consider him a friend? The question landed in the room and sat there. Knox looked at the wall for a moment. I considered him someone I could trust, he said finally. That's as close as I get. Is that by choice? Is what by choice? Not letting people get closer than trusted. She said it without judgment, just asking. He looked at her. You really do ask everything you think of, don't you? I find it saves time. She met his gaze evenly. You don't have to answer. It's not by choice, he said. It's by evidence. He pushed off the counter. The people I've kept closest are the ones who've had the most opportunity to damage me. Trent isn't the first. He's just the one I didn't see coming. A pause. Which is the one that always hurts the most? Bryn nodded slowly. She believed him. She believed him in the specific way you believe someone when they've said something they didn't intend to say quite that honestly, and they know it and they don't take it back. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up fast. Same unknown number. He knows she talked. He has someone in the building with you right now. Bryn's head snapped up. Knox read her face. He had her phone in his hand before she finished holding it out. He read it. 2 seconds. He was at the kitchen doorway calling Deacon's name in the same breath. Deacon appeared from the hallway. What? Someone in the building. Deacon's reaction was immediate and professional. He turned without a word and moved toward the back of the house, hand under his jacket. Knox turned the opposite direction toward the front rooms. Bryn stood in the kitchen, listened to the silence that wasn't silence, the particular held breath quality of a space where people are moving very carefully. She looked at the living room doorway. Cora was on the sofa, still sleeping. Gerald the rabbit tucked under her chin. Behind the closed door at the end of the hall, Ruth. Bryn went and sat on the floor next to the sofa, put her back against it, kept her eyes on the front door. She wasn't going to let anyone through that door while her daughter was asleep on the other side of it. That was simply the only fact that mattered right now. 40 seconds. A minute. Silence from the back of the house. Then Deacon's voice low, kitchen. Knox and Deacon came back. Deacon was holding a phone, a small, cheap, prepaid phone, the kind you buy at a gas station. Not Bryn's, not Knox's. Back bedroom, Deacon said, above the doorframe. It was transmitting. Knox took the phone in one hand and looked at it like it had personally insulted him. Someone put it here before we arrived. Marcus swept the place 2 hours ago, Deacon said. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, the particular shame and fury of a man who is very good at his job and has just discovered that his very good job has a hole in it. Marcus is clean, Knox said immediately. Not hesitant, absolute. Someone came in after him, which means someone knew we were coming here before I made the decision to come here. He set the phone down on the counter, which means the breach isn't in my outer circle. Deacon went very still. It's somebody who was in that car, Deacon said, or somebody who was in that apartment. Knox looked up at Bryn, and Bryn, who had been sitting on the floor next to her sleeping daughter, holding herself completely together, looked back at him and felt a shift in the room with a clarity that was almost physical. He wasn't accusing her. She could see that. His eyes were reading her, not condemning her, but the logic was the logic, and they both knew it, and she made herself hold the gaze steady and let him read whatever he needed to read. I didn't tell anyone, she said. I don't have anyone to tell. It's me, Cora, and a neighbor who's 72 and goes to bed at 8. Your phone, he said. Anyone have access to your location? My location is on for... She stopped, pulled out her phone, went to settings. Her location was shared with one contact, which she had set up a year ago for safety when she walked home from late shifts. It's shared with my coworker, Dana, but Dana doesn't know where. What's Dana's last name? Deacon said. Not Knox. Deacon. With a pen already out. Kowalski. Dana Kowalski. But she's not. She's nobody. She's just someone I work with. We'll verify. Deacon wrote it down. How long have you known her? 8 months. She started at the diner in... Bryn stopped. Her stomach turned over slowly. She started at the diner in March. She looked at Knox. The same week I found Ruth. Nobody said anything for a moment. That's probably a coincidence, Bryn said. She said it firmly. Because it had to be. Because the alternative was that someone had placed a person in her life to monitor an old woman with no memory, which meant they had found Ruth before Bryn even knew Ruth existed, which meant they lost her, Knox said. But his voice was quiet and absolutely certain. They lost her when she walked away from wherever they were keeping her. They didn't know where she'd gone, so they started covering the area, asking around. Someone spotted her going into your building and reported back. He looked at Bryn with something that wasn't quite apology but carried the same weight. Dana wasn't placed to watch you. She was placed to watch my mother through you. Bryn sat with that. So for 19 days, she said slowly, someone has known exactly where Ruth was. And was waiting, Knox said, for me to find her. His jaw tightened. This whole thing, the anonymous texts warning you, running us from location to location. It's not someone trying to protect us. It's someone managing where we go. Bryn's blood went cold. The texts were moving us, making us run, making us predictable. Wherever we went was always going to be the right place for them. He looked at Deacon. Someone is having a very good night right now watching us dance. Deacon was already on his phone. Then we stopped dancing, Bryn said. Both men looked at her. She picked up the unknown numbers thread on her phone. Read back through the texts. Get out of there. Someone who knows what happens next. He's being watched. She was taken for a reason. He has someone inside. Everything this number told us was true, she said. But every true thing it told us moved us somewhere specific. She looked at Knox. What if the texts aren't from an ally? What if they're from Trent himself, feeding us just enough truth to keep us moving until he was ready? Knox stared at her. He knows where we are, she said. He's known since the car. The device in the bedroom wasn't to find us, it was to confirm us. We're already surrounded, or we're about to be. Deacon had stopped talking on his phone. The three of them stood in the kitchen of a safe house that was no longer safe and looked at each other. How many men do you have who you would trust with your life right now? Bryn asked Knox. Who you know for certain are clean. Knox thought it cost him something to answer honestly. 4, he said. Maybe 5. Deacon is 1. Yes. Then use those 5, she said, and stop running. Knox looked at her for a long moment. You want me to stay in a compromised location? I want you to let Trent think his plan is working, she said. Let him think we're here, we're settled, we don't know about the device. You pull your 5 people in quietly, and when Trent sends whoever he's sending, she stopped. You're ready. Deacon looked at Knox. Knox was still looking at Bryn. You've done this before, he said, not a question. I've never done anything like this in my life, she said flatly. But I grew up in a house where my father played chess every Sunday and made me play with him until I stopped losing. The only way to beat someone running a longer game than you is to make them think they're winning until the board looks different. Knox turned to Deacon. Get Rivera Cho and the Torres brothers, he said. Quiet entry. Nobody moves until I give the word. He looked at Bryn. Take your daughter and my mother to the room at the end of the hall. Lock it. Don't open it for anyone except me or Deacon. Not a voice you recognize, not a code word, not anything. Only me or Deacon, in person. I understand. Bryn, he said her name directly for the first time. She felt it the specific weight of being addressed by someone who doesn't use names carelessly. The moment I give you a clear signal, you get them out through the window at the end of that hall. Marcus will be in the alley. You don't wait for anything else. And you, he held her gaze, don't wait for me. I'm not agreeing to that. It wasn't a request. I know, she said, I'm still not agreeing to it. Something crossed his face that she couldn't quite name. He let it go. Get them in the room. She went. Cora barely woke when Bryn lifted her. She murmured something about Gerald and clutched the rabbit and went back under. Bryn carried her to the back bedroom, settled her next to Ruth, who stirred just enough to automatically put her arm around the child without opening her eyes. They fit together like they'd been doing it for years. Bryn stood over them for a moment. Then she sat in the chair by the door, her back straight, her eyes on the handle, and she waited. Out in the townhouse, she could hear Knox and Deacon moving quiet, deliberate to the sound of things being repositioned and people getting into places, and a whole chessboard being rearranged in the dark. She heard a window open and close. She heard two voices she didn't recognize exchange 4 words. She heard nothing after that. 12 minutes of silence. Then her phone lit up. The unknown number. You didn't run this time, smart or stupid, we'll see. She stared at it. Then for the first time she typed back, who are you, Ax? Actually 3 dots. Someone who wants Knox to survive tonight, and someone who needs Ruth to testify before I can prove that. Bryn read it twice. Testify to who she typed. That's the question, isn't it? There are more sides to this than Knox knows. Trent isn't working for Patterson. Patterson doesn't know Trent exists. Trent is working for someone who wants to own the case. Own the outcome. Own what comes after. Bryn's hands were not entirely steady. Who are you working for, she typed. A long pause this time. Longer than any before. Then I'm Ruth's goddaughter, and I've been trying to get her back for 3 weeks without getting either of us killed. Tell Knox that Elena Voss says hello, and tell him to watch the front door, not the back. Bryn was across the room and in the hallway before the phone screen went dark. Knox, she said, low and urgent, and carrying everything the moment needed. He appeared from the front room in 2 seconds. Read her face. What? The front door, she said. It's coming from the front. He turned, said something to Deacon in a voice too low to catch. And then from directly outside the front of the townhouse came the sound of a car slowing, stopping, a door opening, and the particular silence after that, which was not silence at all, but the held breath of a moment that has been building for 8 years and 24 days and is finally inevitably arriving. Knox looked back at Bryn one time. The room, but he said, she went. She pulled the bedroom door closed behind her and stood with her back against it. Her daughter asleep on the bed, Ruth breathing steadily beside her, Gerald the rabbit tucked between them. She held the door handle from the inside. She listened. And from the front of the townhouse, Trent Mallory's voice came through the walls, calm, familiar. Exactly the voice of a man who has decided he is holding all the cards. Knox, he said, I think it's time we talked. Knox didn't move. He stood in the front room of the townhouse and let Trent Mallory's voice come through the front door, like something he'd been waiting for. And the thing that surprised him most was how calm he felt. Not numb, not cold, calm, the specific, terrible calm of a man who has finally stopped wondering and started knowing. 8 years of wondering, 8 years of watching this man sit at his table, eat his food, take his money, attend his mother's birthday dinners, and compliment her cooking and look her in the face with the exact same eyes he used when he looked at Knox and said, I've got you, boss. I've got you every time. And now Trent was on the other side of a door at 3 a.m. thinking he was holding the hand that wins. Knox almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Open the door, Deacon, he said. Deacon looked at him. Knox, open it. Deacon opened the door. Trent Mallory walked in alone. That was the first thing Knox noted alone. No visible backup coat, unbuttoned hands visible. Either a gesture of good faith or a performance of one, and Knox had not yet decided which. Trent was 51 years old, built like a former college athlete, gone slightly soft, with a face that had always read as trustworthy in the particular way that certain faces are engineered to read. Knox had trusted that face. He had staked his life on that face repeatedly for 8 years. Looking at it now made him feel something he hadn't felt since he was 9 years old. Stupid. You came alone, Knox said. I came to talk, Trent said. He looked around the room, steady eyes, voice like he was running a meeting. Where is she? Say who you mean. Ruth. Not your mother, not her. Ruth, first name, immediate, the casual intimacy of a man who had sat at her kitchen table and drunk her tea and accepted her yellow flowers like they were a kindness he deserved. I need to know she's all right. Do you, Knox said. Knox. Trent's voice shifted softer, careful, moving towards something that sounded like regret. But that Knox was now reading as a very well-practiced instrument. I know how this looks. Tell me how it looks. Like I betrayed you. He said it straight, no flinching. That was the thing about Trent, he had never flinched. Knox had respected that. He understood now that it wasn't courage. It was the particular steadiness of someone who had decided a very long time ago what they were willing to do and made their peace with it. I need you to let me explain before. She wore her good coat, Knox said. Trent stopped. The night she disappeared, she was wearing her good coat, which means she was going somewhere she thought was worth dressing for. Knox looked at him. She trusted you enough to get in a car with you. Where did you take her, Trent? A beat. One beat that told Knox everything before a word came out. She wasn't supposed to be hurt, Trent said. That was never the plan. I just needed her. Somewhere quiet, Knox said, while you figured out what she'd heard and what she'd remembered and whether it was going to be a problem. She overheard a conversation that could have. She is 67 years old, Knox said. His voice didn't rise. That was the thing about real anger, the genuine kind, the kind that has been living in your chest for 8 years wearing the face of trust. It doesn't need volume. She has memory problems. She weighs 74 pounds. She takes blood pressure medication twice a day, and she calls my daughter. He stopped, corrected himself. She calls small children little bug, and you decided she was a threat that needed managing. Trent's jaw worked. I panicked. You planned, Knox said. There's a difference. You had her taken somewhere and you left her there, and then she got away from you. And instead of picking up the phone and calling me and saying, Knox, I made a terrible mistake, you spent 3 weeks monitoring a waitress's apartment and planting listening devices in safe houses and running us in circles through the city. He paused. Let it sit. That's not a panic, Trent. That's a campaign. Trent looked at him for a long moment. Then he let out a breath, long, slow, like something deflating. Okay, he said. Okay, you want the truth. I've been waiting 8 years for it. The Patterson case is real, Trent said, and it's bigger than you know. She doesn't have enough to move on you yet. She's been building, but she has enough to hurt you. Enough to put people you care about in rooms they don't come out of clean. He leaned forward slightly. I went to her because I saw what was coming. I saw the evidence stacking up, and I knew that eventually someone in your circle was going to flip under pressure, and it was going to be whoever Patterson got to first. I decided it was better if it was me, if I controlled what she got. You controlled what she got, Knox repeated. I gave her enough to stay satisfied, enough to keep her from pushing harder, and I kept back enough to protect you. He said it with conviction, with the specific sincerity of a man who has told a story so many times he can no longer locate where the truth ends and the version he needs ends. I was managing it, Knox, for you. The room was very quiet. Deacon against the wall had an expression on his face like he was watching something painful that he couldn't look away from. Elena Voss, Knox said. Trent's face changed. For the first time, something real moved across it, not the practiced sincerity, not the controlled confession. Something that looked like actual fear. What about her, he said carefully. She's been sending messages to Bryn's phone all night, moving us around, trying to keep my mother safe. Knox watched every micro movement on Trent's face. She says you're not working for Patterson. She says Patterson doesn't know you exist. Silence. She says you're working for someone who wants to own the case, own the outcome. Knox took one step forward. Who are you working for, Trent? Trent looked at him, and in that look, Knox saw it, the thing beneath the thing, the layer under the confession that the confession was designed to cover. You should sit down for this, Trent said. I'll stand. Trent pressed his lips together. Then Victor Kane. The name landed in the room like a body hitting the floor. Deacon actually moved one step forward, involuntarily, immediately stopped. Knox did not move at all, but the quality of his stillness changed completely. Victor Kane, a name that existed in Knox's world, the way a fault line exists underground, invisible, responsible for catastrophic things, but never the thing you pointed to. Kane was Chicago's actual architecture, not the streets, not the territory, not the operations that got prosecuted. and appealed and prosecuted again. Victor Kane was the money behind the money. The call that happened before any decision Knox had ever thought was his own. Kane has been positioning for 2 years, Trent said. His voice was different now. Quieter, faster, the voice of a man who has decided the only move left is the full truth. He wants Patterson to close the case, not prosecute you, close it. Make it go away with enough of the small fish satisfied that she can call it a win. And then he steps into the vacuum. Clean. Nothing connected to him. The whole north side reorganized under his infrastructure while you're busy not being in prison and thinking you won. Knox was very still. He approached me 14 months ago, Trent said. He knew about the Patterson case before I did. He knew about it before your lawyers did, which tells you everything about how far inside the city's institutions this man operates. He looked at Knox with something that was at least partially genuine. I didn't come to him, Knox. He came to me. And by the time I understood the shape of what he was building, I was already inside it. And my mother, Knox said. Flat and dangerous, Trent's shoulders dropped. She heard me on the phone with Kane's lawyer. She didn't know what she heard, but I couldn't be sure what she might say to you or when. And Kane, he stopped. Kane doesn't leave variables. He told you to handle her. The silence was its own answer. He told you to handle her, Knox said again, slower. And you did. She wasn't hurt. She's been sleeping in a stranger's apartment for 19 days in borrowed pajamas, eating scrambled eggs because she didn't know her own name. Knox's voice didn't break. It went lower. It went to the place where it lived when things were completely irreversible. She sat on cold front steps at midnight in a city she's lived in for 67 years and didn't know which way was home. Trent said nothing. Get out, Knox said. Trent blinked. Knox. I said, get out. Still quiet, still level. Walk out the front door and keep walking and think very carefully about your next 12 hours because what happens in those 12 hours is the only thing that determines what comes after them. If you move on me, Kane will. Trent. Knox looked at him. Just looked. The way he'd looked at 100 men in 100 rooms before decisions that couldn't be undone. I need you to hear me. I am talking to you right now because for 8 years you sat at my table and I am giving you the one courtesy that deserves. But if you say one more word about what Victor Kane will do, I am going to stop being courteous. Trent looked at Deacon. Deacon looked at the wall. He left. The door closed behind him. The room was absolutely silent for 5 seconds. Then Deacon said, he's working for Kane. Yes. Kane has been running this whole thing. Yes. Knox. Deacon's voice dropped. Kane has people in every institution in this city. Judges, aldermen, 3 senior people in the FBI field office. If he's decided to reorganize the north side, I know, Knox said. This isn't a problem we can. I know, Deacon. He turned. He went to the hallway. He knocked on the back bedroom door 4 times, the specific rhythm he'd established before. It's me. Open up. The handle turned. Bryn opened the door and looked at him. She read his face the way she'd been reading his face for 6 hours now, quickly, completely, with the particular accuracy of someone who has spent a night in the specific proximity of another person's crisis and learned the language of them. She didn't ask if it was over. She could see it wasn't. She just stepped back and let him in. Ruth was awake. She was sitting up on the edge of the bed with Cora's head in her lap, running her fingers absently through the little girl's hair. She looked up when Knox came in, and her face did the thing it had been doing since the scar, not full recognition, never quite that clean, but the shape of recognition. The almost. My boy, she said. Hey, Mama. He sat next to her on the bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. How are you feeling? Tired, she said, and also not. She looked at him sideways. Something happened. Some things are getting sorted out. Is it bad? He looked at her. This woman who had raised him alone in a 3-room apartment on the south side, who had worked 2 jobs and still made Sunday dinner, who had told him once that the most dangerous thing a person could be was someone who forgot what they were willing to do to protect the people they loved and then spent the next 4 decades demonstrating exactly that. It's getting better, he said. Ruth put her hand on his. You were always a terrible liar. He laughed, short and genuine. I know. Tell me. Mama, Knox, She said his name the way she'd always said it when she meant, I am your mother and I have earned the truth. Tell me. So he did. Not everything, not the parts that would frighten her in ways she couldn't hold, but enough. The case. Trent. The name Kane. The shape of what the next days would look like. He kept his voice even and he watched her face and she listened. The way she had always listened, completely without interrupting, with her hand steady on his. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the man on the phone when I heard Trent talking, the name he said to whoever was on the other end. Knox went still. Mama. I told you I heard Patterson, Ruth said down. That's true, I heard that name. But there was another name first. A name I didn't recognize. A name I didn't tell you because... She stopped, her brow furrowed. Because I didn't know why it mattered. I didn't know enough to know why it mattered. What name? Knox said, very quiet. Ruth looked at him directly. Her eyes were the clearest they'd been all night. Hargrove, she said. He said Hargrove first. Then he said Patterson was ready. Knox looked at Deacon in the doorway. Deacon's face had gone pale. Because Hargrove was a name they both knew. Senator Dale Hargrove, Kane's longest and most carefully maintained investment in legitimate power. The man who had sat on the Senate Judiciary Committee for 11 years and whose influence over federal appointments, including U.S. attorneys, was well understood by everyone who knew how the actual machinery of Chicago operated. Patterson wasn't independent. Patterson was Hargrove's, which meant Patterson was Kane's. The federal case being built against Knox's organization wasn't a threat to Kane's reorganization plan. It was the reorganization plan. Prosecute enough to make it look real close it on terms Kane controlled and emerge on the other side as the only structure still standing. It's not just the north side, Knox said. He heard his own voice from somewhere slightly outside himself. He's not just taking territory. He's taking the legal infrastructure that governs it. If Hargrove controls who prosecutes and Kane controls what gets prosecuted, nobody can touch him, Deacon said. Ever. Unless someone talks before the case closes. Knox looked at his mother. Unless someone with direct knowledge of what Trent said on that phone and what names were involved makes a statement to the right people before Patterson's office seals the case on Kane's terms. Ruth looked at him steadily. You need me to tell someone what I heard. I need you to tell Elena Voss what you heard, Knox said. She's been trying to get you safe enough to do exactly that for 3 weeks. She's not just your goddaughter, Mama. She's... I know what Elena does, Ruth said calmly. She told me a long time ago. A pause. I didn't tell you because she asked me not to. Knox stared at his mother. She asked me not to, Ruth repeated without apology. She said it would put her in danger if certain people knew she was... She stopped, touched her temple. She works somewhere official, somewhere that investigates things. I can't hold the details. Her jaw tightened with the particular frustration of someone fighting their own mind. But I know what she does, and I know she's good. Knox sat back. Elena Voss, Ruth's goddaughter, who had been sending texts to Bryn's phone all night, who had been trying to navigate an old woman with no memory to safety through the middle of a situation so layered that Knox himself was still finding the floors of it. If Elena Voss worked for a federal agency that was separate from Patterson's office, if she had been building a parallel case targeting not Knox's organization but Kane's control of Patterson's case, then Ruth's testimony wasn't just relevant. It was the center of everything. Bryn had been quiet in the corner through all of this. Knox looked at her now. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, and her expression doing that thing it did reading, processing, deciding. She's been protecting Ruth, Bryn said, this whole time. The texts to me weren't from Trent. They were from Elena. She was trying to get Ruth out without blowing her own cover. She looked at Knox. She used me because I was already the safest place Ruth was going to land. She couldn't approach directly without exposing herself. So she guided things from the outside. And when I found Ruth tonight, Knox said it accelerated everything. Because once I moved, Ruth Kane was going to move to silence her before Elena could get her in front of the right people. So what do we do? Deacon said. Knox looked at his mother, at Cora asleep in her lap, at Bryn against the wall, at Deacon in the doorway, the one man in 8 years he had never had reason to doubt and knew tonight he still didn't. He picked up his phone and typed one message to the unknown number. 3 words. Tell me where. 20 seconds. The response came back with an address with an address, a federal building, a name Special Agent Elena Voss, Internal Affairs Division, FBI Chicago Field Office. And one last line, I have a room ready. I've had it ready for 3 weeks. Bring her now. Knox stood up. He looked at Bryn. You don't have to come. I know, she said. She was already reaching for Cora. I know what it is, she said. I've known your mother for 19 days. I'm not dropping her at a federal building at 4 in the morning and going home. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. Ruth was already on her feet, smoothing her cardigan, her chin level with the posture of a woman who has decided that whatever is required of her tonight, she is capable of giving. Should I wear my good coat? She asked. Yes, Knox said. Wear your good coat. They left the townhouse at 3:48 in the morning. Knox's 5 clean men around them. Deacon driving Cora asleep against Bryn's shoulder with Gerald the rabbit tucked under her chin. Ruth sat next to Knox in the back seat with her good coat buttoned to the collar and her hands folded in her lap and her eyes clear in a way that made Knox's chest ache. I remember more than I let on sometimes, she said quietly as the city slid past. He looked at her. I know. I get frightened by how much is gone, she said. So sometimes when things come back, I hold them quietly for a while before I say them, to make sure they're real. She looked at her hands. The name Trent said on that phone. I've been holding that for weeks, waiting until I was sure I had it right. She looked at Knox. I'm sure. He took her hand. She let him hold it. They rode the rest of the way in silence. And it was not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have said enough for now and are simply present with each other in the only moment they have, which is this one. Elena Voss met them at the side entrance. She was 43 years old with her mother's eyes and a badge clipped to her belt and 3 weeks of sleepless maneuvering written into the set of her jaw. She looked at Ruth first, just looked at her the way you look at someone you have been terrified of losing, and Ruth looked back and said, there she is, in the tone of someone who has found something they were keeping safe in their memory. They held each other for a moment in the cold. Then Elena looked at Knox over his mother's shoulder. I know you have questions. Many, he said. You'll get answers. She pulled back, looked at Bryn, at Cora, at the whole impossible, exhausted, improbable group of them. All of you. But first, she looked at Ruth. First, I need you to tell me what you heard exactly as you heard it. Can you do that? Ruth straightened, buttoned the top button of her good coat. I can do that, she said. They went inside. The full truth of what Trent Mallory had built and what Victor Kane had designed and what Senator Hargrove had enabled came out over the following 7 hours in a federal conference room on the record with Elena's case file and 3 years of parallel investigation and one 67-year-old woman's testimony arriving at the same destination from different directions and making each other undeniable. Trent Mallory was in federal custody before noon. Victor Kane's assets were frozen by 2 o'clock. Hargrove resigned from the Senate Judiciary Committee at 4, citing health reasons, which was the kind of lie that everyone involved understood and nobody needed to argue about. Patterson's case was transferred to a different jurisdiction, a different prosecutor, and effectively dismantled from the inside, not because Knox was innocent of everything, but because the case as it had been built was itself evidence of something far larger and far more corrupt than anything it had ever pretended to pursue. That was a problem for other days. There would be other days and other rooms and other decisions that Knox would have to make about his life and what shape it took from here. He knew that. He had always known that a man couldn't build what he'd built and then simply stop building and expect the world to look the other way. There were accountings coming. He was not naive about that, but that was later. Right now it was 6 in the evening and Ruth Ashford was sitting at a kitchen table in a federal facility eating scrambled eggs that Bryn had made from the supplies Elena had ordered in because Bryn had said she won't eat anything else until she's comfortable, and she won't be comfortable until she's had her eggs, and Elena had said whatever she needs, and Knox had watched Bryn make scrambled eggs in an FBI kitchen at 6 in the evening like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Cora was doing homework at the end of the table. She had school tomorrow. She had mentioned this 3 times. She was very committed to the information. Ruth was telling Elena a story about Knox at age 7 that Knox found humiliating and that everyone else found wonderful. He sat across from his mother with his coffee going cold and let her tell it, let her remember it, hold it, speak it out loud into a room full of people who were listening, and he did not look away from her face for a single second of it. Bryn set a plate down in front of him. He hadn't asked. She just made extra. You should eat, she said. I'm not hungry. I don't care, she said pleasantly and sat down next to Cora. He ate. Later, much later, when Cora was asleep on a cot in the next room, and Ruth was settled and Elena was still working through paperwork, and Deacon had gone to handle the 1,000 things that needed handling, Knox found Bryn in the hallway outside the kitchen, leaning against the wall, with her eyes closed and her arms wrapped around herself, and he stood next to her and leaned against the wall too, and they stayed like that for a while without speaking. What happens to you now? She asked eventually, eyes still closed. I don't know yet, he said. I'll figure it out. That's not very specific. No, he agreed. She opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling. She called Cora Little Bug again this morning, before everything started. She was completely lucid, and she called Cora Little Bug and told her that a good nickname is something someone gives you when words aren't big enough. Bryn paused. Cora's going to be wrecked when she can't see her anymore. Knox looked at her profile. Who said anything about that? Bryn looked at him. My mother needs consistency, he said. Routine, familiarity. You've been telling me that since the diner. He held her gaze. You said it yourself. She knows you. She knows Cora. She knows scrambled eggs and card games and a rabbit named Gerald. He paused. That doesn't have to end because tonight ended. Bryn stared at him for a long moment, reading him the way she'd been reading him last night, completely honestly, without looking for what she wanted to find. You're not just talking about Ruth, she said. He looked back at the ceiling. I'm talking about Ruth, he said. And then after a beat, I'm also not just talking about Ruth. The hallway was quiet. Bryn looked forward again. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. And Knox Ashford, who had spent 8 years trusting the wrong man and one night trusting the right woman, pushed off the wall and went back into the room where his mother was sleeping and sat in the chair beside her bed and stayed there until morning because she was found and she was safe and she was his. And some things in this world are exactly that simple and that sacred and that enough.